It began with a simple boundary dispute. I thought it would end there. I was wrong. Karen Davis, my neighbor, had other plans. She started planting an illegal fence along our property line, blocking my access to a creek that ran through the easement behind my home. The creek wasn't just scenic, it was part of my property's charm, a quiet spot where I'd walk Pixel, my dog, and tend to my beehives. I approached Karen politely, holding a surveyor's report and my deed, both clearly showing the boundary. "This is my land," I said, pointing to the map. She scoffed, arms crossed, her platinum hair glinting in the sun. "We'll see about that," she snapped. I figured she'd back off once she realized I had proof, but Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. The next day I found her hammering stakes deeper into the ground, each one creeping closer to my side. I called the county clerk to confirm my records, then left a voicemail for the HOA, hoping they'd intervene. No response. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down, piling dirt against my fence to anchor her posts. It was a power move, plain and simple. I knocked on her door, documents in hand, and tried reasoning again. "Karen, this is illegal. The survey shows the line. Let's settle this." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't tell me what's legal," she said, then slammed the door. That night I heard a truck idling near the creek, followed by the clank of metal. By morning, her fence extended another 10 feet, now fully blocking the easement. I'd had enough. I called the sheriff's office, requesting a deputy to review the situation. Deputy Rogers arrived, a calm man with a no-nonsense demeanor. I handed him the survey deed and photos of Karen's fence. He walked the property, measuring distances with a tape from his truck. Karen stormed out, waving her own crumpled map, claiming the creek was community property. Rogers barely glanced at it. "Ma'am, this survey's official," he said, tapping my documents. "You're on their land. Move the fence or we'll have a problem." He tipped his hat. "Have a pleasant day." Karen's face reddened, but she said nothing. Rogers drove off and I felt a flicker of relief. Surely she'd comply now. But as I walked back to my house, I caught her staring from her porch, phone in hand, already dialing. Her expression wasn't defeat, it was defiance. I knew then this wasn't over. Pixel nudged my leg, sensing my unease. "We'll handle it, buddy," I said, scratching his ear. But deep down I braced for what Karen had in store. This was no longer just about a fence, it was war. 2 weeks after Deputy Rogers ordered Karen to move her fence, I came home to chaos. My fence was sliced in 3 places, wires dangling like broken bones. Deep tire marks gouged the creek bank, and one of my beehives lay shattered, frames scattered, honey seeping into the grass. Worst of all, Pixel, my dog, yelped after stepping on a nailboard hidden near the fence line. The vet cleaned his paw, prescribed antibiotics, and warned of infection. Rage replaced my patience. Karen had crossed a line. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras, set to ping my phone every 10 seconds until muted. I also hired Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision. She arrived with fluorescent stakes and laminated placards, each warning of criminal penalties for tampering with survey monuments. By noon, my property line glowed orange, a clear message to Karen I wasn't backing down. That night at 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up with camera alerts. The live stream showed 2 hooded figures by the creek. One with platinum blonde hair peeking out was Karen. The other, taller and wielding bolt cutters, was Chandler, a local troublemaker known to Deputy Rogers from past calls. They yanked Nora's stakes, tossing them into the water, and ripped down the placards. Moonlight caught Chandler's face mid-grimace, a perfect still for evidence. I called Rogers at dawn, sending him the footage. He recognized Chandler instantly. "Got a warrant," he said within hours. By 7 a.m., he and 2 deputies knocked on Chandler's door. Body cam footage later showed Chandler in pajama pants, insisting he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up my camera still. Chandler, bolt cutters in hand, caught red-handed. He went quiet. Karen's house was next. In her garage, Rogers found the stolen stakes, Nora's placards, and a half-empty can of spray paint, the same shade used to deface my no trespassing signs. Karen claimed Chandler stored tools there without her knowledge, but Rogers wasn't buying it. The camera showed her at the scene, not just complicit, but leading the charge. Both were arrested for criminal mischief and trespassing. Karen made bond by lunch, her lawyer already spinning excuses. Chandler wasn't so lucky. On probation for a 2021 check kiting scheme, he faced a no-bond hold pending review. As they were cuffed, I felt a grim satisfaction. This wasn't just about my land anymore, it was about justice. I met Nora later to replace the stakes. They always underestimate a good survey, she said, hammering a new one into place. Pixel, bandaged but wagging, stayed close. The cameras kept rolling, ready for whatever Karen tried next. I didn't know then that this was only the start of a bigger unraveling, one that would expose fraud far beyond my property line. For now I had evidence, a deputy on my side, and a clear line in the sand. Karen had started this war, but I was ready to finish it. With Chandler in jail and Karen out on bond, my lawyer, Elliot, sensed blood in the water. The fence dispute had exposed something bigger. We subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, targeting the $3,500 cashier's check used for Karen's illegal gate. Signed by Chandler, the HOA's bookkeeper, it came from the reserve account. Digging deeper, we uncovered a trail of checks totaling $46,900 for grounds improvements that never happened, phantom projects like non-existent landscaping and fake irrigation upgrades. The gate was just the tip of a fraudulent iceberg. The HOA board, a mix of retirees and busy professionals, was stunned. They trusted Chandler's ledger entries and neon green approval stamps. At an emergency meeting, they voted unanimously to press charges, their faces pale with betrayal. I sat in the back, watching Karen's absence speak louder than her usual complaints. She'd been a board member after all, always pushing for community enhancements. Now her role looked more like collusion. Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crime unit took the case. She seized Chandler's home computer, uncovering a digital goldmine, forged receipts, fake meeting minutes, and a word template for those green stamps. Most damning were bank records showing $12,000 funneled to Karen's personal account, labeled as consulting fees for projects that didn't exist. Page's report noted Karen's signatures on several fraudulent invoices, tying her directly to the scheme. This wasn't just vandalism, it was organized theft. Karen lawyered up fast, hearing James Hall, a defense attorney who charged $600 an hour and answered questions with a smirk. He filed motions to suppress the garage evidence, claiming improper search procedures, but the judge wasn't swayed. My camera footage, showing Karen at the creek with Chandler, was airtight. Hall's bluster couldn't erase her platinum hair glowing under moonlight. Chandler, meanwhile, faced a grim reality. His 2021 check-kiting conviction meant probation revocation, plus new felony charges for theft and conspiracy. Starring down years in prison, he cracked. Over coffee with his public defender, he agreed to testify against Karen in exchange for a plea deal. He'd detail her role in the land grab and HOA fraud, including how she'd promised him a slice of my property once the HOA annexed it. In return, the DA offered a reduced sentence, pending his full cooperation. Elliot called me with the news. Chandler's singing, he said. Karen's in deep. I felt a quiet thrill, not just for my case, but for the neighborhood. The HOA's reserve fund, meant for playgrounds and storm drains, had been their personal piggy bank. Now it was unraveling. Small wins started piling up. The HOA board, eager to rebuild trust, sent me a letter of apology for their oversight. They also hired an independent auditor to review past budgets, ensuring no more Chandlers slipped through. A local news blog picked up the story, quoting Deputy Rogers praising my vigilance with the cameras. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to stopped by, offering coffee or asking about Pixel's paw, which was healing well. One evening, I walked the creek with Pixel, the new survey stakes glowing under dusk. Nora Beltran had checked them twice, ensuring no one could dispute the line again. The beehive was rebuilt and the bees hummed softly, oblivious to the chaos. Karen's bond kept her away and Chandler's jail cell kept him quiet. But I knew the legal fight wasn't over. Karen's lawyer was prepping for trial and Chandler's testimony would be the linchpin. For now, though, the tide had turned. My land was mine, the HOA was waking up, and justice was closing in. Pixel nudged my hand and I scratched his ears. We got this, I whispered, feeling the weight lift just a little. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. After months of legal wrangling, Chandler and Karen faced judgment. Chandler, already in custody, pled guilty to his probation violation from the 2021 check-kiting case, triggering an automatic 18-month prison sentence. For the new charges, felony theft, conspiracy, and criminal mischief, the DA offered a deal: 4 years with parole eligibility in 2 if he testified truthfully against Karen. He took it. Chandler's testimony was a bombshell. On the stand, he laid out Karen's scheme. She'd masterminded the land grab, aiming to annex my property by bullying me into submission and using HOA funds to legitimize it. She promised him a cut of the land for his services, forging documents, cutting fences, and pulling stakes under cover of night. His voice shook as he described her instruction, her insistence that no one would care about a few acres. The jury leaned forward, riveted. My Ring camera footage sealed the case. The prosecutor played a grainy clip, Karen and Chandler loading rebar into her SUV at 12:47 a.m., the timestamp matching the night Nora's survey stakes vanished. Karen's platinum hair was unmistakable, her movements deliberate. Chandler's bolt cutters glinted in the moonlight. The defense tried to poke holes, blurry video, no audio, but the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence was overwhelming. After a tense deliberation, the verdict came: guilty on all counts for both felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. Karen's bond was revoked, her lawyer's objections drowned out by the judge's gavel. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, ordered to pay $32,000 in restitution to me for damages, beehives, fence, Pixel's vet bills, and $46,900 to the HOA for the embezzled funds. A no-contact order barred her from me for 5 years post-release. Chandler faced additional time but avoided the maximum thanks to his cooperation. Karen's face was stone as deputies cuffed her. I caught her eye during sentencing, offering a polite wave, not out of malice but closure. She tried to steal my land, my peace, and nearly hurt Pixel. Now she'd pay the price. Chandler head bowed, shuffled out in his orange jumpsuit, a shadow of the cocky troublemaker caught on my camera. Outside the courthouse, Elliot shook my hand. You did more than win, he said. You exposed them. The HOA sent a statement to the local paper, thanking me for uncovering the fraud. Neighbors texted congratulations, some joking about my cameras deserving a medal. I felt lighter, not just because of the verdict, but because the fight was over. My land was secure, the creek sparkled under the sun, and Pixel bounded through the grass, his paw fully healed. That night I sat by the rebuilt beehive, listening to the hum of new bees. The greenhouse I'd started planning would rise where Karen's fence once stood. Justice wasn't just the sentences, it was reclaiming my home, my community, from greed. Pixel curled up beside me and I scratched his ears. We're free, buddy, I said. The war was won and the future was ours. The dust of the trial settled, and with Karen and Chandler behind bars, the neighborhood exhaled. The HOA, now under a reformed board, moved swiftly to make amends. A week after the verdict, I received a formal letter of apology signed by all 7 members. Attached was a check for $4,500 drawn from Chandler's frozen bank account to cover the cost of my destroyed beehive, Pixel's vet bills, and the sliced fence. The gesture wasn't just financial, it signaled a shift. The community wanted to heal, and I was ready to move forward. I stood by the creek, Pixel at my side, and surveyed the land Karen had tried to claim. The surveyor's stakes, replaced by Nora, glowed orange in the morning light. The air smelled of damp earth and possibility. I'd been planning a greenhouse for years, a place to grow tomatoes, herbs, and maybe some flowers for the bees. Karen's fence had delayed it, but now the space was mine again. I called a local contractor, sketched out a simple design, and broke ground the following week. By month's end, the greenhouse stood proud, glass panels gleaming, shelves lined with seedlings. Inside, it was warm, alive with the scent of soil and basil. Pixel nosed the door, curious, and I let him in, laughing as he sniffed a pod of mint. The bees, too, were thriving. With the $4,500, I rebuilt the shattered hive and added a second, stocking both with a hardy strain of pollinators. The hum of their wings became my daily soundtrack, a reminder of resilience. I spent mornings tending the hives, checking frames, and harvesting honey that glowed gold in the jars. Neighbors started stopping by, drawn by the buzz or maybe just curiosity. Heard about your bees, one said, a retiree named Clara. Can I buy a jar? I sold her one, then another to her friend. Soon I had a small side hustle, my honey gracing local breakfast tables. The HOA's transformation was just as striking. The new board, led by a meticulous accountant named Priya, implemented quarterly audits and open budget meetings. They invited me to one not as a complainant but as a stakeholder. I went more out of caution than trust, but left impressed. Priya projected the reserve accounts recovery plan on a screen, detailing how they'd recoup Chandler's theft through legal claims and tighter oversight. "We owe you," she said, catching me at the coffee table. "Your cameras caught more than a fence dispute." I shrugged, but her words stuck. My fight had ripple effects. That spring, I noticed new faces at the creek, kids with nets chasing minnows and parents snapping photos. The HOA had designated the easement a public access point, with a small sign crediting my survey work for clarifying the boundary. It wasn't the solitude I once craved, but it felt right. The creek belonged to everyone, not just me or Karen's schemes. Pixel loved the activity, bounding toward any kid who'd toss him a stick. His paw was fully healed, his limp gone, and his joy was infectious. Then came an unexpected letter. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, had bought Karen's foreclosed property at auction. They reached out asking me to consult on planting native pollinators to complement my bees. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's land, once a battleground, would become a garden. I met their director, Leela, at the site. She was young, earnest, with a binder full of soil test results. "We want this to be a community hub," she said. "Your bees could make it special." I agreed to help, sketching out plans for milkweed, coneflowers, and sunflowers to draw pollinators. The first planting day was a revelation. Neighbors I'd only waved to showed up with shovels. Deputy Rogers, off duty, hauled mulch bags, his grin wide. Priya and the HOA board brought water bottles and a banner, "Sprout Tomorrow, growing together." We turned Karen's manicured lawn into raised beds, the soil dark and rich. Leela handed me a trowel, and I planted the first sunflower seed, pressing it into the earth. Pixel darted between volunteers, tail wagging like a metronome. By summer, the garden bloomed. Tomatoes hung heavy, zucchini sprawled, and my bees danced between blossoms. Sprout Tomorrow hosted a small market, and I set up a table with honey jars, selling out by noon. Clara, my first customer, brought her grandkids, who ran through the beds, giggling. "This used to be a war zone," she whispered, nodding toward Karen's old house. "You changed that." I didn't argue. The garden, the greenhouse, the buzzing hives, they were proof of something better. At home, I hung a new "no trespassing" sign, more for closure than necessity. The cameras stayed up, but their alerts were rare now, mostly catching deer or stray cats. Elliot called to confirm Karen's restitution payments had started, $58 a month, a slow drip from her prison wages. It wouldn't make me rich, but it was justice in pennies. Chandler's plea deal held, and his testimony ensured Karen's sentence stuck. One evening, I sat in the greenhouse, Pixel sprawled at my feet. The bees hummed outside, and the creek murmured beyond the glass. The land was mine, not just in deed but in spirit. I'd fought for it, won it, and built something new. The neighborhood, once fractured by Karen's greed, was knitting itself back together. Sprout Tomorrow's garden, my honey, the kids by the creek. They were opportunities I hadn't foreseen, born from a dispute I'd never wanted. I scratched Pixel's ears. "We did good, buddy," I said. The future smelled like basil. Halfway through a jar, I spotted a recipe for roasted butternut squash glazed with honey and garlic. It was a nod to the garden, to new beginnings, and to the peace we'd earned. A year after the trial, with Karen's prison sentence in full swing and Chandler serving his time, the neighborhood had transformed. My greenhouse thrived, its shelves bursting with tomatoes and herbs, while the bees hummed in their rebuilt hives, producing honey that sold out at Sprout Tomorrow's market. Pixel, fully recovered, chased dragonflies by the creek, his tail a blur of joy. The peace felt hard-won, but a new challenge loomed, proving the past wasn't quite done with me. It arrived in the form of a letter from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir. She insisted Karen had granted her a private right-of-way across my land, citing a deed that looked suspiciously fresh. My stomach sank. Another land grab, cloaked in legal jargon. I called Elliot, my lawyer, who laughed grimly. "They never quit," he said, pulling the document from my fax. Within days, he and Nora, the surveyor, disproved the deed as a forgery. The signatures didn't match Karen, and the notary seal was a known fake from a 2023 fraud case. Elaine, facing perjury risks, withdrew her claim before the court hearing, her lawyer muttering apologies. Elliot grinned as we left the courthouse. "You're a magnet for this nonsense," he teased. I didn't laugh. I doubled the batteries in my cameras. Restitution checks began trickling in from the state's crime victim fund. Karen's prison wages, garnished at $58 a month, would take decades to cover the $32,000 she owed me, let alone the $46,900 to the HOA. The payments were symbolic, a reminder of her defeat, but I deposited each one with a nod to justice. Chandler, meanwhile, sent an unexpected letter from prison. He'd earned a paralegal certificate and in careful handwriting apologized for the vandalism, the fraud, the chaos. Enclosed was a hand-drawn map suggesting orchard placement on my land, apple and pear trees to complement the bees. "I owe you more than words," he wrote. I stared at the map, torn. The gesture felt genuine, but trust was hard-earned. I wrote back, brief but civil, mentioning the sunflowers now taller than me. No promises, just acknowledgement. The real surprise was Sprout Tomorrow's progress. The nonprofit, now a fixture on Karen's former property, had turned her sterile lawn into a vibrant community garden. Leela, the director, invited me to consult on expanding their pollinator beds. Over coffee, she showed me plans for lavender, bee balm, and goldenrod to draw my bees and local butterflies. "This land was a fight," she said. "Now it's a gift." I couldn't argue. Karen's obsession with control had backfired. Her property was now a public good, its soil feeding neighbors she'd once alienated. Their first major volunteer day drew a crowd. Deputy Rogers in jeans and a flannel hauled compost bags, joking about his retirement workout. Priya, the HOA's new chair, brought her kids, who planted zucchini with gleeful messiness. I loaned my brush cutter and we cleared a patch for fruit trees, a nod to Chandler's sketch I hadn't admitted to keeping. The air smelled of turned earth and sweat, the chatter weaving neighbors into something like a team. Leela handed me a spade and I dug a hole for a young peach tree, its roots curling into the soil. Pixel darted between legs, stealing a glove and earning laughs. Rogers tossed him a stick and the kids cheered as he raced off. By late summer, the garden was a marvel. Tomato vines sagged with fruit, sunflowers nodded in the breeze, and my bees swarmed the new beds. Sprout Tomorrow hosted a pollinator party, with kids painting bee boxes and adults swapping recipes. Clara, my honey customer, brought a pie laced with my harvest, its crust golden and sweet. "You started this," she said, slicing me a piece. I shook my head, but the truth lingered. My fight had sparked something bigger than a property line. The HOA, too, kept evolving. Priya's audits uncovered no new fraud, and they'd recovered half of Chandler's stolen funds through asset seizures. They installed a bench by the creek, engraved with a small plaque, "For community thanks to resilience." I didn't ask who it referenced, but I sat there one evening, Pixel at my feet, watching the water ripple. The cameras caught only wildlife now, their alerts a quiet comfort. Elliot called to confirm Karen's no-contact order held firm, with her release still months away. Chandler's parole hearing was approaching, and he'd requested a reference letter. I hadn't decided yet, but his map lay folded in my desk, a question mark. For now, I focused on the present, the greenhouse, the garden, the bees. Sprout Tomorrow planned a fall festival, and Leela asked me to lead a beekeeping talk. I agreed, sketching notes on hive health and honey yields. One morning, I walked the property line, Nora's stake still bright. The creek sparkled, kids' laughter echoing from the garden. Pixel bounded ahead, free and fearless. Karen's schemes, Elaine's gambit, Chandler's betrayal, they'd all led here to a community reborn. The land was mine, but its gifts belonged to everyone. I patted Pixel's head. "Full circle, buddy," I said, and we headed home, the sunflowers swaying behind us. The seasons turned, and the scars of Karen's land grab faded into memory. My greenhouse flourished, its air thick with the scent of basil and ripening tomatoes. The bees, now in 3 thriving hives, produced honey that flew off Sprout Tomorrow's market tables. Pixel, his paw long-heeled, raced along the creek, chasing shadows and splashing through shallows. The neighborhood, once fractured by greed and fraud, was knitting itself back together. But the final victory came not in courtrooms or restitution checks. It grew from the soil of Karen's former property, now a vibrant community garden. Sprout Tomorrow had transformed the land. Where Karen's manicured lawn once stood, raised beds burst with zucchini, peppers, and kale. Sunflowers towered, their golden heads nodding to my bees, which swarmed the pollinator beds I'd helped design. Leela, the nonprofit's director, called it a living apology for the HOA's past failures. I saw it as poetic justice. Karen's obsession with control had birthed a space that nourished everyone. The irony was as rich as the garden's soil. The first volunteer day marked a turning point. Over 40 neighbors showed up, armed with shovels and seedlings. Deputy Rogers, off-duty and grinning, hauled wheelbarrows of compost, his badge swapped for a faded baseball cap. Priya, the HOA's new chair, brought her teenagers, who planted tomato starts with surprising care. I loaned my brush cutter and we cleared a corner for a small orchard, peach and apple trees, a quiet nod to Chandler's prison letter I hadn't shared. The air buzzed with laughter, the clink of trowels, and the hum of my bees circling nearby. Leela handed me a spade, and I dug a hole for a young cherry tree, its roots spreading into the earth. Pixel, ever the mascot, stole a glove and pranced through the beds, earning cheers from kids who tossed him sticks. Rogers caught my eye as we paused for water. "Never thought I'd see this," he said, gesturing to the garden. "You kicked the hornet's nest and look what came of it." I shrugged, but his words landed. My cameras, my stubborn fight, had done more than save my land, they'd sparked a reckoning. The HOA's audits, Priya's leadership, Sprout Tomorrow's vision, all traced back to that first dispute over a fence. By fall, the garden was a marvel. Vines sagged with fruit, and the pollinator beds, milkweed, bee balm, lavender, drew butterflies and my bees in droves. Sprout Tomorrow hosted a harvest festival, their biggest event yet. Tables lined Karen's old driveway, laden with produce, ruby tomatoes, glossy eggplants, and braided garlic. My honey jars, labeled with a simple Creek Gold sticker, sold out by noon. Clara, my first customer, brought her grandkids, who painted bee-themed signs for the beds. "This place was a battlefield," she whispered, slicing me a wedge of her honey-drizzled cornbread. "You made it a home." I didn't argue. The garden was proof of what came after the fight. The HOA kept evolving. Priya's quarterly audits ensured no repeat of Chandler's fraud, and they'd clawed back $30,000 of his stolen funds through asset seizures. They installed a gravel path to the creek, lined with benches, one bearing a plaque, "For unity thanks to perseverance." No names, but I knew who it honored. I sat there one evening, Pixel sprawled beside me, watching kids skip stones across the water. The creek, once Karen's obsession, was everyone's now. Legal loose ends tied up quietly. Elliot confirmed Karen's restitution payments, $58 a month from her prison wages, were steady, though they'd take decades to clear her $32,000 debt to me and $46,900 to the HOA. Her no-contact order held firm, her release still distant. Chandler's parole hearing loomed, and he'd asked for a reference. I sent a short note, acknowledging his apology and orchard sketch, but stopping short of endorsement. His map stayed in my drawer, a question I wasn't ready to answer. At home, the greenhouse was my sanctuary. I added trellises for climbing beans and a corner for marigolds, their orange blooms a nod to Nora's steaks. The cameras, still vigilant, caught only deer and owls now. Pixel patrolled the property line, his barks more playful than protective. The bees hummed, their hives yielding enough honey to fund a fourth. I bottled it under moonlight, the jars glowing like small victories. The festival's closing dinner was the capstone. Sprout Tomorrow set long tables under string lights, serving dishes from the garden, roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, heirloom tomato bruschetta. Leela raised a glass to neighbors who fight for what's right, her eyes on me. I waved it off, but the applause warmed me. Rogers, Priya, even Nora, who'd driven in for the event, clapped loudest. Pixel, curled under my chair, thumped his tail. As dessert, Clara's honey pie circulated, I looked across the garden. Karen's house, now a community hub, glowed with life. The land she'd tried to steal fed us all. My fight, born of anger, had planted something enduring. I scratched Pixel's ears. "We won, buddy," I whispered. The stars above the creek agreed, and the victory felt final. Fall settled over the creek, and the echoes of Karen's schemes faded. My greenhouse thrived, tomatoes ripening beside marigolds, while the bees hummed in their hives, their honey a neighborhood staple. Pixel roamed the fields, his paw healed, his barks full of joy. Sprout Tomorrow's garden, blooming on Karen's old land, stood as a testament to resilience, a victory sweeter than any courtroom win. I built a barn, permitted and sturdy, using reclaimed wood from Karen's dismantled shed. Each plank, weathered by her greed, now framed a space for tools and dreams. It stood as a quiet monument to what I'd overcome. The cameras, still watchful, caught only wildlife, their alerts a reminder of peace earned. Karen's restitution checks, $58 a month, arrived steadily, a slow drip of justice. Chandler's parole loomed, his apology letter unanswered but not forgot. Sprout Tomorrow's harvest dinner lingered in my mind, laughter, shared plates, the garden's bounty uniting us. The neighborhood, once divided, felt whole. I walked the property line, Nora's stakes bright, the creek sparkling. Pixel bounded ahead, free. The fight had forged something lasting, not just my land, but a community reborn. I turned hostility into nourishment, and that was enough.